So we want to go ahead and dive in with the Q&A. Just to give you a little bit of context, we've had some pretty good attendance. There are some people in this group who are considering syndication. A syndication size apartment complex would easily be the largest thing that any of us had ever invested in or brought partners into. And so that's kind of the perspective we're coming from, is single family, 4-family, maybe a larger apartment building, but a lot of us are looking at this like next step up. So Jonathan Farber and I have gone through all the questions the group came with the last couple of weeks, and we're going to go ahead and dive in, the two of us, with the boiled down version of those questions. If we have time left over, we'll do Q&A with everybody. So first thing, Joe, with regards to the cost of mentorship and a good quality mentor, that mentorship is obviously valuable and in a lot of cases worth the cost. Question, with a background in Keller Williams, we've been taught to lead with revenue, meaning when we're going to incur a large business expense, we need to create the profit in that business first that covers the cost of that expense before ramping up marketing or doing something new. So question, Joe, how can an apartment investor lead with revenue for the cost of mentorship?
Well, it depends on what their background is, and it depends on what which ties into their skill sets. So are you, just so I'm understanding correctly, if I have 4 units and I want to do a syndication, and I see that there's a mentorship program that I want to join, but the investment to join, I think of it as an investment. The investment to join is thousands of dollars. The question, I'm making sure this is accurate, what you're asking. The question is, how do I make money before I join the program so that the program essentially pays for itself? Is that right?
Yes. So as an apartment investor who's already doing smaller deals, how can I, or even does it make sense to try to create the profits that will cover the cost of mentorship before investing in a mentorship program?
So one way is by meeting people at your meetup or locally who are doing what you want to do, the larger deals, asking him or her, what can I do to help you out? And it's likely going to be in the category of finding deals, or maybe you joint venture with them on, maybe you help with the execution of their business plan, and you volunteer your time for free. That doesn't help with the money part, but what it does do is it allows you to get the experience, and then ultimately, if you are doing something that is of value to them, then they will compensate you for it, or if they do not, then you should evolve and go work with someone else or multiple other people. I mean, so some concrete ways. One is finding a deal. If you have, it's interesting, someone that is local to where I live and where Slocomb lives in Cincinnati, he does apartment syndications, and he's partnering with wholesalers, and those wholesalers are bringing him a lot of leads for apartment communities that are 50 plus units. So if you have a skill set for finding single family homes or smaller multifamily, you can apply that same approach to generate leads for multifamily properties. And it's simply asking one more question, when you're talking to a seller, do you have any other properties that you're looking to offload? And if the answer is no, then great. If the answer is yes, then you've got a business model, and you can start partnering with others. But it's going to be challenging to make money from apartment investing before you know how to do apartment investing. So it's really a specific question. If I knew the person's background and I knew their skill sets, then I could give a more substantive answer. But without knowing that, those are my thoughts for how to generally do it if you can find deals.
That makes sense. So if I'm looking to learn apartment investing, find someone who's good at it, who could be a coach or a mentor, find a way to add non-monetary value to them in the place of a paid mentorship program. And so I think you answered this. Quick follow-up. Does it make sense to go ahead and try and do my first one first, see what happens, and then generate the profit from that first deal to pay for mentorship to get better at it?
Depends on you, because my first one, I hired a consultant, but I wouldn't recommend him. I don't think there was alignment of interest, and it wasn't necessarily disclosed. And the property lost money. It was the only property that I have purchased, maybe my fourth single family home, but the property, the first syndication I did, lost money. I paid back my investors plus 14% annualized return out of my own pocket after we sold the deal for a couple years. It took me to do that. And if I had my book, quite frankly, that I wrote, that would have been very helpful. And if I had someone who was teaching me things along the way that had alignment of interest, that's important, then that would have decreased the amount of money I lost and perhaps made money, but in reality, I probably wouldn't have bought that property. But there's the catch, because if I hadn't have bought that property, then I wouldn't have the portfolio that I have now with our investors. So there's no right or wrong answer to your question. What is necessary is to have the psychology that is required to go through a bad deal, and to have the character that is required to put others before you. If you have the psychology and the character, then sure, you could do a deal without a mentor. If it doesn't go well, then you'll bounce right back and you'll come back stronger. Or you could wait and do a deal with a mentor, and you will likely be in a better place for doing so. But there's more of an investment on the front end, so you're more out of pocket. But the reality is, in this business, this is a 7-figure business per deal when you get to the larger deals for money that you can earn. And so when you look at that compared to any investment in the program, it's much larger than any investment for the program. So, it depends on the individual, but ultimately, make sure that you've got the right psychology, and we can talk about that if you want. But I know you got a list of questions. Make sure you got the right character, so you're proud of what you're doing when no one's looking. And if those two things are done, if those two things are in place, then you can take either path.
Awesome.
Cool. Okay, Slocomb, I guess I'll just jump to the second question. What's going on, Joe?
Hi.
Thanks for doing this. So a common topic amongst the group, and I'm sure you see it time and time again, is the topic of raising capital, and can be a daunting task for people starting out. So within that vein, the question that I have is, if you were to go back to the beginning, or if you had general advice for most syndicators that, let's say, had business experience or sales experience when they're starting out raising money, do you recommend maybe just for, let's say, operational efficiency at the beginning, to try to target higher net worth individuals to have maybe less limited partners than to try to raise the same amount of money from smaller investors? So it's less investors, higher net worth, versus more investors with, let's say, lower initial capital input.
For someone starting out, my recommendation is to bring on as many investors at a smaller amount. If we're choosing between two, which likely if you're starting out, you're not choosing. you're just whoever comes your way that makes sense. You're going to partner with as a limited partner, but more investors, because then you have more positive word of mouth once you perform and you do well and you deliver on the expectations, or hopefully exceed the expectations. We have had projects where we've had one limited partner, and it's wonderful because there's one conversation. We've had three projects where that's taken place. However, when we do really well, it's one person to talk to their friends. Now, granted, they have influential, high net worth friends because they're the only limited partner on the deal. But a lot of, I'll say this generalization. I think it's accurate. A lot of ultra wealthy people prefer to remain private, and I can tell you, with our investors, the ones who write the 7-figure checks for our deals, they don't want me to write a blog post about them, profiling them or anything. They want to be private, so they are less inclined to talk about their investments with others, because one thing that wealthy people don't mind is paying, and this is related but not directly applied to what we're talking about, but it's related and it's important for psychology. One part in wealthy people don't mind is to pay more for really good service or really good product, but they don't like getting taken advantage of because they are wealthy. And that happens a lot, where unfortunately, because they're wealthy, people reach out to them and they get bombarded with requests. And so because of that, their guard is up. And so a consequence of that is that they are guarded whenever they talk about their investments. Therefore, it is less likely that a super wealthy person is going to talk about their investments and their success with investing to others. Whereas people who are not at that level, who cannot write checks for $5 million a pop to invest with you, they might not be exposed to that world. Well, they're not exposed to that world as much as those who can write 5 million plus checks. Therefore, they're more inclined. They're accredited investors, so they're rich people, but there's a difference between having $1 million in the bank account and having $30 million in the bank account. It's just a different psychology and a different level. And so those are the investors, those accredited investors, but not the ultra wealthy, who are going to talk about you and their success, and and most likely they are still working as a professional in some capacity, whether they're a physician or whether they're an entrepreneur. And that's where a lot of referrals come. People who are working with others and in close proximity to others and talking to them throughout the day. So starting out, you do what you need to do, and you bring on the investors. But in ideal world, more investors, less amount, and then as you grow, then you bring on the investors with the larger checks. And quite frankly, you're probably not going to attract the investors with the large checks until you grow a little bit. It was about our fifth deal where we attracted a larger investor, and he ended up writing a large check, and he was the only limited partner on our deals.
Cool, thanks.
Next question. So this is a little more personal, Joe. Given my experience and my business model thus far, I am looking at properties that would fall more into the distressed category than the value add category. I have a lot more control of doing my own property management, doing the asset management. I'm the one who hires and fires the people who are working on the properties. So I see higher potential reward along with the higher potential risk of distressed property. Among your investors, not asking for names, asking for demographics or characteristics, among the investors you've worked with, who would make sense as a demographic for me to reach out to with regards to investing in more distressed deals?
Well, it's a tough question for me to answer because we do not do distressed deals. So I don't have the personal experience. So anything I say would be speculation.
That's fair.
So if I were to speculate about investors who are inclined to invest in distressed deals, I'd speculate that those are the investors who have more real estate experience and are able to see the beauty in the deal, even if it looks really ugly when presented to them. So it's people who are not investors who are investing in a syndication for the first time. It's most likely people who've invested in syndications already and also have a firsthand real estate experience to be able to see, okay, this business model does make sense. And even though it's not what it's going to look like, even though it currently doesn't look like what it's going to look like, I have faith in this operator. And I've seen firsthand on other deals that, yeah, you can turn, something really ugly to something that's cash flowing and makes sense.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense.
This question's a little more focused on just the capital raising again, or just the types of partnerships. In the book, Joe, you made a distinction between raising debt versus equity, and how in the case of debt, you receive full control of the property if you can pay that amount off through whatever business model you do. But with equity, there's pros and cons of each. I guess, do you have any advice for people starting out that are considering doing JV deals with, let's say, debt investors versus jumping into syndication to start? How you talk through the differences between maybe your students or people that are considering doing either or?
Well, first off, for structuring deals, you'll want to talk to your securities attorney, make sure you're structuring it properly. I'm not one, but I can tell you that if the deal allows you to have debt investors and you can bring in people who want to be debt investors, not equity investors, one, you're delivering what they want because they're looking for a coupon, essentially. But then two, you're going to make more money, most likely. The challenge is eventually you're going to need to buy them out. And the deal needs to be something like Slocomb was describing, most likely, because you're going to need a major bump in valuation from what you bought it at to what its value at in order to buy out those debt investors. Otherwise, you're just saddled with debt the entire time. So most deals are not going to make sense for just debt investors because they simply won't have that, conservatively won't have a big jump in valuation such that it allows you to buy out the debt investors. Because, think about it, on a refinance, for everyone on this Zoom meeting, if you've done a refinance before, have you done a refinance where you've got 100% of your equity out plus whatever the debt is, say it's 10% per year or something? Have you done that? If so, great. You killed it. Did you project that you're going to do that? Because if you did and you did it, 2 thumbs up. Nice work on that. You nailed what you projected. But man, that's rather aggressive projection to do. Hey, we're going to buy this property. We're going to increase the value. I will pay 100% of the investors back. I will pay 100% of the equity or the debt back to investors upon refinance, because that's likely what you do. In this case, plus 10% per year to those investors, and then I'm going to own it, with the lender and with no investors. I mean, what a wonderful business model if the deal allows for it.
Cool.
Next question is about due diligence. You put some numbers in your budget line, in your line items for due diligence. The rough estimates you put in the book come out above $30,000 in due diligence costs. Is there is it really always a flat amount like that? Is there some relationship between the size of the property or the value of the property and the amount that you should expect to spend in due diligence?
The value of property's not relevant. The size of the property is, with most businesses, there's fixed and variable costs. Some variables are going to be just walking the units and working with the team on the ground to do due diligence for each of the units. Plus, more units, the more HVACs there are, the more mechanicals that need to be inspected. So it's not a there are economies of scale, but it does increase incrementally with the increased size of the property.
So that 31.5 estimate from the book, what size property should I expect that is?
I don't know. I haven't read my book in 3 years or so. I don't have it with me.
All good.
If it doesn't say, then I'll get that answer. I think it's a 250 unit. I think that's the example that we use in the book. But if you double check that it doesn't tell you how many units, then let me know and I'll get you that answer so you can get it for the group.
I'll check. Thank you. And this may be in the book as well. Still want to ask though, the cost of due diligence. I'm out 30 grand. I don't even own anything yet. I'm not even sure if I want to buy it. That 30,000 plus, am I raising that from partners? Am I coming out of pocket? Is that something that coming out of pocket for it? Am I getting reimbursed for that from investors at closing? How is that getting paid for?
Ideally, let's talk about it. I always like talking about the ideal scenario, then we can talk about reality is. Ideally, you are delaying the payment to all vendors until you close on the property. That way you are not out of pocket, and the payments to those vendors, they are paid at closing, and that comes from the total equity that is raised for the deal. It should be a line item. It should be in your sources and uses in the legal documents. The reality on my first deal, so that's what we do now, what I just described. the reality, and there might be some miscellaneous vendors who need to be paid up front, and then that's paid by you, Slocomb, but then or your company, and then you're reimbursed at closing. The reality on my first deal, for the earnest money deposit, I did not have $50,000 for an earnest money deposit, but I knew an investor who said he wanted to invest with me. He's a family friend, and I asked him to let me borrow the $50,000 for this. I gave him a personal guarantee that I would pay it back, and that's how I was able to get the earnest money deposit. I said, if I lost it, I'll pay you back plus, I forget what percent I said. Then he ended up investing that into the deal. So it was nice and clean.
Slocomb, what do you think? Time for one more, Joe? I have a hard stop at 12:30. I could maybe go with one quick one just before we tie off. With COVID, Joe, a lot of us are value add investors, other than maybe Slocomb, who would go a little more distressed. I just got the courage for it. But basically,
he's still adding value, just a whole lot more than you and I had.
Right. Yes, definitely. Just, I guess, by the definitions in the book.
Fair enough.
So a lot of us, let's say, are considering our first larger, and for us, that might be a 20 to 50 unit building. And the business model basically relies on adding value and speculating we can get rents to. And with COVID-19, that's a little bit more up in the air. So with that, my personal approach has been then seeing where we can improve things operationally to maybe cut costs instead of raise rents. Do you have any guidance or what you're telling your students as far as maybe a percentage that they should maybe be a little bit more careful or conservative with, as far as if they're expecting to raise rents by X amount, maybe double back and consider that you won't be able to achieve a full rent raise in the next 12 to 18 months because of COVID? Or is that a little bit city to city? How do you think about it?
You all have a Facebook group, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to send Slocomb a blog post that my team and I wrote about underwriting during COVID and assumptions that we're making for that. So that will give you the details. As far as what you're talking about, cutting down on operating expenses, absolutely. You cut down on expenses, but if you're not assuming that you're going to get rent bumps, then the deals, good luck finding a deal. I don't think that's going to be possible. So it really depends on the market, the submarket, the competition, what's proven, and being an expert in that particular pocket. But I'll give you that article. I'll search for it right now before my next call's right now. But I'll get it to Slocomb, and then you'll have that in detail.
Cool. Thank you.
Joe, thank you again for joining us. I will shoot you an email here in a minute for some of the questions we weren't able to get asked. Thanks again for your time.
All right.
And have a good one. Enjoy your conference meeting.
All right. Thanks, everyone.